Hi, everybody. We are live for sure on Facebook. And I'm pleased to welcome you to our first Facebook Live event with two candidates for Congress. Anthony Clark is running in Chicago. In which district, Anthony?
7th Congressional District, West Side, South Side, and suburban areas.
Welcome. And Liam O'Mara is running in the 42nd Congressional District here in California.
Southwest Riverside County.
Welcome, Anthony, Liam, everybody. And I'm Joe. I am Liam's campaign manager. And I am going to moderate, facilitate a little bit today, but we're really going to let the candidates speak about their visions and concerns on a number of issues. And if we have time, we'll respond, they will respond if they have time to questions, comments you raise in the chat here on the Facebook event. We have folks helping us try and monitor those.
Actually, I should open that up. That's a good idea.
So let's get going. Why don't we start with Anthony and first and then Liam. Tell us about yourselves, your campaign. Just good introduction to yourselves.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to be on. It was wonderful when I traveled to California. I believe it's now about 2 weeks ago. Came to California to film a commercial spot, and Liam and I, reached out and made connections. That's what it's about: coalition building, not only within city, within state, but across this country. Because of course, what our campaign states is, struggle is a universal language. So struggle exists within Chicago, struggle exists within California, struggle exists across the globe. So Anthony Clark, our election takes place March 17th. Our campaign is Anthony Clark 2020. That's our campaign title. Website, voteanthonyclark.com. Various social media applications, Anthony V. Clark 20. So essentially, I'm a disabled military veteran. I joined what we dubbed the poverty draft back in 2003. Like so many across this country, the military is a large welfare state. So it essentially targets impoverished communities. In my estimation, I like to make I statements, targets impoverished communities. And what does the military dangle in front of individuals? Healthcare, housing, employment, food, as well as paying for education. So you have a rich person's war fought for and died for by poor individuals. So joined the poverty draft in 2003, lasted 6 years active duty within the military, was shot in 2007, as well as diagnosed with Behçet's disease, an autoimmune deficiency, in 2008. So I was honorably discharged, trust me, in 2009. From there, went through the Troops to Teachers program as I felt being exposed to poverty, being exposed to, struggle being universal and how poverty exists, again, within the United States of America. Poverty exists in Turkey, poverty exists in Iraq, Kuwait, so on and so forth. No matter where you go, you will encounter struggle. And if you've experienced struggle, when you see it. So that was eye-opening to me. So leaving the military, I wanted to go and do something that I felt could give back. And I felt that if I went through teaching, that I could honestly help to radicalize students through sharing my experiences, sharing my truths, in hopes that they would not have to enter into the poverty draft like I did. So, I've been teaching for going on 11 years now. Unfortunately, similar to our military industrial complex, our educational system is broken. So, having 11 years of teaching experience at a multitude of public schools, from alternative to charter to city, where I was on strike in 2012, to now to the public school that I teach at. Essentially, our public schools are, our educational system is broken. Across this nation, we continue to have individuals pushing for privatization, pushing for charter schools. I do not blame, parents for sending their children to a charter school because they're simply, like my parents were, looking for greater opportunity for their child. But our local and federal governments, the way that our schools are funded through property taxes is inequitable. That's how you have vast wealth disparities within communities, vast disparities within schools, to where you could literally cross a street and go from one school to where students have literally 0 books, maybe 1 computer. Teachers have to out of pocket pay for all of their supplies to schools to where every student has an iPad, every student has a Chromebook. Every teacher can make as many copies as they like, and everything is covered and provided to them. That makes a difference. So teaching, learning that was broken. I started a nonprofit in 2006. Equity issues, whether it be, addressing racism, addressing sexism, working with immigrant populations, helping small businesses, helping the homeless. So we've been doing that for a long period of time. And, to kind of sum it up, based upon that work, we received Village of the Year award in 2017. That put us on the radar as multiple individuals in the community nominated us to run for office through Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats at that time. So we accepted that nomination because we felt that we could either spend essentially the rest of our lives feeding the homeless, reacting to symptoms, or we could give everything we have to ending homelessness. So you either react to symptoms or you proactively address the root cause. And that's why we chose to run, to proactively address the root causes that exist. And for us, the ultimate root cause is capitalistic oppression, which leads to, again, the ills that we're facing: homelessness, climate change, food insecurity, food deserts, gun violence, lack of livable wages. Essentially, in the most wealthiest country in the world, individuals are too poor to live, and we cannot accept that. So we're running again. Anybody who's listening, know if you're interested in running, no, run. Never let anybody tell you not to as a grassroots candidate. But understand that may mean that you're running more than once, because we're trying to take power. Power is not given to you. We have to take power from the establishment. So essentially, we're back running again, and we're going to win this time. March 17th is our election, and no matter what happens, we're going to continue to run. We're going to continue to push forward.
Great. Thank you, Anthony, so much. Liam, you're up.
Okay, so I'm Liam O'Mara, and this is Oreo, my sort of step dog that I get to watch every now and then, just in case he makes some noise. I am running for Congress in the 42nd in Southwest Riverside County. I'm a Southern California native, not from a particularly privileged background. My parents split early on, entirely working class roots. I was the first person in my family to get a college degree, and it took me a long time to do it. During high school and afterwards, I bounced around doing all kinds of, physical work, construction, maintenance, worked as a union fry cook for a while, tried to follow my father onto the waterfront because 4 generations of my family had worked in the Port of LA and Long Beach. But most of the jobs were disappearing. They're being automated away, and, successive union contracts were giving fewer and fewer jobs to people, and it just got harder and harder to do. I ended up finding a way to get into college at age 30. 4 generations of my family had worked in the Port of LA. I had tried actually I'd actually joined the military myself in the whole poverty draft that Anthony brings up there. I tried that in the 90s, jumped into the Navy, and didn't end up serving very long because I ended up collapsing in a precision drill, found out I have a few health problems that don't really go well with military service. But that was my attempt to try and get ahead, get money to go to college. So it took me a long time to be able to do it. And when I did, I managed to push all the way through to a PhD, picking up a fantastic amount of debt in the process because, like Anthony pointed to again, our education system is broken, and that's K-12 all the way through college. Higher education used to be a pathway into the middle class, and today it's a pathway into permanent poverty because you graduate with so much debt that you can't buy a house, you can't buy cars. So it actually holds back the entire real economy too, because it stops so much actual spending. It's a ridiculous system, and a lot of it just comes, again, root causes. We cut so much of the funding out of higher education, but the costs keep going up, so they just say, well, we'll just loan it to you through the government, and then it passes it on to us. The government is still spending the money. if you think about those federal student loans, they are still putting the money in, but instead it's a loan that we take on instead of actually funding for the public universities that we used to have. Anyway, so I have been, for the last dozen years, teaching at universities. I focus primarily on the Middle East, but teach also a bunch of classes on world history in Europe and the history of ideas. And this is where, again, I really relate to that sense of struggle being universal that Anthony raised. I've spent rather a lot of time in the Middle East, and I have hitchhiked and couch surfed across the Arab world. And I have seen that no matter how poor people are, they're still incredibly giving anywhere you go. But there's this sense of injustice that you can relate to anywhere. And while we don't have the same level of, I mean, a lot of the problems don't get quite as bad if it's living in, for example, a military dictatorship, but things are a lot worse here than we tend to think. And I think a lot of Americans are disconnected from how much we have declined in the last 40 years. And that's what gets me to run, because I pay attention to a lot of the data. I have seen the decline. I have watched the loss of 20% of the middle class, a steady increase in poverty, a collapse in our living standards from first in the world to 17th. And this infuriates me because we remain the richest country in the history of the world, and we do not take care of our citizens. We blow that money on wars and all kinds of nastiness, which we can then talking about. But I want to get to the root causes. I want to address what we're doing wrong and try to put that in, a usable way politically. So I guess that's a little intro.
Great, thank you, Liam. So, Anthony, you are a teacher, I believe you're saying, right?
Correct.
And Liam, you are a teacher as well, and
More or less.
Places.
Mm-hmm.
So, teach us a little bit about this thing called the military-industrial complex. What is it? Where's that term come from? How does this complex work? And why should we care?
I could start with a little bit of the background of it and then pass it on to Anthony for a little bit more of the direct interaction with it, if that works.
Sounds great.
I mean, one of the things that, it's become sort of just a trope at this point, because it goes back to a speech in 1961 where Eisenhower was leaving office, and he pointed to the influence of defense contractors on our policy. And a lot of this just goes back to the fact that they have an interest in selling stuff, so they convince the military that they want this stuff, and they convince lawmakers to fund this stuff. And how do you convince lawmakers? Well, you pay for their elections. So it creates a sort of revolving door where people end up serving in Congress and then become lobbyists for defense contractors and or go back into politics. So they're all scratching each other's backs between the legislative branch and the defense contractors, which means tons of stuff is coming in. And at this point, it's no longer as much a matter of appealing directly to the military, which happened a lot more during the Cold War. At this point, we're frequently getting things the military doesn't even need. And it's just a matter of driving that spending and, let's do this whole new project and then cancel it partway and start a whole new project, because it's constant money flowing in. And that's driven in large part by the legislators. One of the things that's insidious about it, and again, this goes back to 1961 and Eisenhower saying, hey, pay attention, because if you don't pay attention, this is a significant threat to our liberty. And how much time has gone by? One of the biggest problems we face today is that a lot of jobs for the defense contractors are spread all across the country deliberately. So they end up in tons of different congressional districts, such that if you were to stand in Congress and say, hey, maybe we don't need this ridiculously expensive plane or ship or this or that, you can't, because you're risking someone's jobs. Someone can say, hey, you just cost me 1,000 jobs in my district, and that can get somebody out of office. So the fact that they're basically paying for elections and spreading the jobs out into districts means they can keep this going up.
Yeah, definitely, Liam. I thank you for, your articulation of the military-industrial complex, the vested interest, as you stated, that our government shares with, the defense industry. And at the end of the day, we know, the connection generally always leads to profit. And serving 6 years active duty, I guess I could, put, a little extra cap on what Liam so expertly stated in regards to what it looked like. So I came into the military essentially as a crew chief, a C-17 Globemaster, which are airplane mechanics. Aircraft increasingly are becoming more technologically sound or equipped. So with the scoring that I had within my ASVAB, essentially it was either computer programming, which I knew personally I would not succeed at, or becoming a C-17 Globemaster. But what even at an early age,
Anthony?
prior, yes,
Sorry.
Hold on a sec.
For
No
those
worries.
of us who've not served,
Kind of explain
what is an ASVAB?
what is an AS?
Sure, definitely.
Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, I think. It's a
Yes.
test. They told me I should be in like nuclear science or something. I'm
Right.
like, yeah,
Exactly.
no, it's not for me.
So essentially, yes, that's great. Thank you for pointing that out, because as a high school teacher right now, often, again, I'm trying to play my part in individuals not entering into, again, what we dub the poverty draft. But essentially, in order to enter into the military, no matter your branch, every branch has a certain scoring level. Essentially, Army, the Marines, the Navy, and the Air Force. And based upon your score, your ASVAB score, it's essentially like a standardized placement test for college. Based upon your level and how well you score, that will open up or eliminate certain job opportunities for you. So essentially, the lower your score, the more apt you are to essentially be a grunt, the type of language that we utilize, to be a foot soldier, to be the first individual, on the line with the weapon in hand, first line of defense, literally. And the higher you score, that opens you up to, greater avenues in a sense within the military. So my score, led me to either going into computer programming, or again, I could have worked on, a multitude of aircraft or, other things as well. But those are the two main jobs essentially that I remember stuck out that relied on technology. So essentially, even at that time when I was extremely young, serving, and of course at that time I didn't even know what the military-industrial complex was. I was essentially just trying to live, but it was imparted upon me in a sense that how we recognize the warmongering that occurs, the destabilization of other nations that occur, the attacks on democracy at an international level that often occurs. But essentially, each day that I was in the military for 6 odd years, outside of, a deployment where I was actively engaged, or outside of, when I was injured, we essentially practiced. Every day we were in practice. So we practiced warmongering. So we would get up every day, work on aircraft every day, work on the computer programs within these aircraft. The aircraft would fly off. We would do practice missions, drop whatever we were dropping, launch whatever flares we were launching, go to different states, or, the aircraft would come back. And then this process would happen over and over again. We would change tires. We would be, fixing wings, fixing the frame, the manifold, so on and so forth, the hydraulic systems, the computer systems. And just to scale this down, don't quote me, but if I remember correctly, the back end of the aircraft, there was at least 12 tires, at least 12. Let's go there. At least 12 tires, 12 huge aircraft tires on the back end of the aircraft and on one side. Each tire essentially with a price tag on it based upon the contract, each tire would cost over $300. This is one aircraft, one tire on one aircraft. So if you multiply that by, say, 20 aircraft on a base practicing per day, if you multiply that, say, about 30, 40 tires, maybe 100 tires per day at $300 a pop, and this is one base. Imagine the amount of money, the amount of tax dollars that are essentially spent on practicing war, preparing to warmonger. And essentially, we all know that everything is upmarked. Prices are upmarked. A tire does not cost $300, $400, $500. But again, what was stated earlier, what Liam shared with our contractors, our military contractors, in step with our policymakers, this is how we get to a point to where we're spending trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars on military. And for the most part, at over 90% of the time, it's not even being engaged in warfare. It's essentially practicing warfare. It's essentially doing things that we don't need to be doing. I've went on missions before to where we stayed in, and again, we literally stayed in, 5-6 star hotels, as well as, went on missions to where we were in dirt. But we've had missions before where, again, you're questioning, even serving, like, what are we doing? Like, why are we even here? What is the purpose of this? Why are we engaging in this? Why does a screw this big cost $80? So it's ridiculous. And, that's why, individuals, I can't speak for Liam, but I know he agrees. We could be spending this money on our educational system. We could be spending this money on our infrastructure that continues to crumble across our nation. When you look at our rail systems, our transportation systems, when you look at the climate change and the impact of extremely old pipes that are embedded within our land that are delivers lead infested water. Look at Flint, Michigan. Look at Chicago, where I'm at, California. Same issues that exist. So we just need to really change things and reevaluate, as a nation, what it truly means. Because we should place diplomacy before war, and placing diplomacy first literally means that we could cut trillions and trillions of dollars from our military budget, from our military spending. And while, as Liam stated earlier, we're talking about jobs, because it's the poverty draft, if we then take those trillions of dollars and invest them in our educational systems, invest them in our infrastructure, we'll actually create jobs within our economy, within the community that is not directly attached to war, where poor individuals have to fight and die.
So you're laying down a lot of good threads here we can pick up. So before I forget, the climate change one is a big one. If you take the U.S. military by itself, completely divorce it from the rest of the United States, cars, industry, everything else here, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like the 40th largest polluter in the world as a country. If you count it as a country,
yes.
Just the military. And this is because we have ships all over the world. We got a dozen aircraft carriers. We have 800 military bases overseas alone in 80 countries. We have stuff everywhere. And you mentioned the practice stuff. I mean, so one of the campuses I teach at is in San Diego County, where we've got the big Marine base and big naval base there. And every day I'm driving down that freeway and you see these jets flying overhead, because you have to practice. If you have the possibility of going to war, people have to know what they're doing. You can't get everything in a simulator. So we practice, and we spend so much money on the fuel, on the maintenance, on everything, but it's all designed to keep us in a state of permanent readiness for war. One of the things that irritates me is that after all previous wars here, both for us and realistically throughout our history, after a war, you tend to demobilize. You scale back. You focus it on civilian industry. After World War II, our defense spending went up. We have never gotten off of a wartime economy. Every single year we continue to increase the spending on it and increase our interaction in other countries. From right away in 1946, 1947, we started getting involved in military operations overseas. We literally never stopped fighting wars. And that costs an extraordinary amount of money that could be better spent elsewhere. One of the biggest arguments people will make about, as soon as you say, I want to cut the defense budget, I mean, that's often political suicide. I remember, what was it, 2004, I think, in Kucinich's race, he was like, I want to cut a little bit off the military budget. And he was like, he's out of here. And one of the biggest issues you run into there is the jobs. Because, well, if you cut spending, what about all the people who work and the defense contractors? What about all the people who support the bases, everything else? And that leaves out the fact that we're already used to spending the money. Why not spend it on something that actually is going to grow the economy, help ordinary people, prepare us for the jobs of the future? The defense industry did, in many ways, throughout the Cold War, greatly increase our, the kind of industry that affects ordinary people's lives. I mean, think about all these little computers that we're carrying around today that were helped out by the space program, and then jumped into that. What if we just invested in these technologies directly without the possibility of constantly going to war? Just tons of little ones stand out to me. Like we were the world leader in solar cells and battery technology for a long time. I mean, Jimmy Carter put solar cells on top of the White House. Reagan took them off immediately, but the technology goes back into the 70s. we're way behind now. The Chinese are kicking our butt in research on this because we don't invest. We'd rather spend it on the next new missile, the next new pointless jet. So yeah, I think there's a big question of spending priorities we can get to.
Okay, so let's circle back. Let's do this. If you could both tell us a bit about, on your campaigns, how you're raising money. Are you taking money from anybody? So campaign finance, and is there a connection between campaign finance and the military-industrial complex?
Oh, yes. And actually to an issue that Anthony raised a moment about the cost. So like, why does a screw cost so much money? Why do those tires cost $300? It's because of that revolving door between Congress and the industries themselves that they're supposed to be regulating or procuring things from. So you end up with these sweetheart deals that, you know, okay, we're only going to turn it to this one company, or these 2 or 3 companies are the only ones who can bid. And then you get locked into a contract, and you could only get the screw from one company, and that company can charge whatever the hell they want. Ultimately, that comes down to the legalized bribery that is our campaign finance system. So you have to raise money to run for office, and someone comes along and says, hey, I'll give you a few $1,000s if, and people keep taking that money.
So Anthony, on your campaign, campaign finance.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's directly tied to corruption, essentially. Within a democracy, we state that it's a representation of the people, but it's impossible to represent the needs, the wants, the desires of working class people across this nation when indeed money and when indeed corporations are viewed as people. Let's get that out of the way. First and foremost, corporations are not people, but yet and still, those are the people, the corporations that are consistently placed first in regards to decision making, in regards to the policy making and influence. I'm a 100% grassroots candidate, just like Liam is. We've signed multiple pledges. We signed multiple pledges last time. We're powered by what we call the big poor. So individual donations from working class people across this nation empower our campaigns 100%. Within our race, our incumbent, Danny K. Davis, he's been in office for decades. And essentially what's interesting, we actually just had a forum this past week in which we brought up the fact that he states that he would be for Medicare for all. But here's the kicker. You're being funded by Big Pharma. So how can you truly be a fighter for, genuinely for Medicare for all, healthcare is a human right, when the exact organizations that fund you will not benefit from that policy? So what he tried to respond with in his team, each year we only get $12,000 from Big Pharma. It's not a big deal. So then I responded with, and we responded with, well, it's a big deal to a grassroots candidate like ourselves. $12,000 could mean a lot. $12,000 would be a lot of touches to people and making connections. So if it's not a big deal, give the money back. You can imagine they did not respond to that challenge that we made. But we have to get rid of Citizens United. Corporations are not people. Across this nation, I think we're seeing movements. I believe in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, at a city council level, at a local level, they've gone to like a voucher system to where they're trying to react to the pervasiveness of money in politics. But it's a huge issue that exists. We have congressional candidates and incumbents, and let's look at the incumbents that essentially are not even looking at many of the policies that they're signing off on, many of the legislation that they're presenting to Congress, or many of the legislations that they're presenting at the Senate level. They're not reading it. Essentially, they're being presented it. Here you go. Here goes your check. We need, right, exactly. Just sign off on it. We need you to support this. And this is true. Many of them don't even read what they're supporting.
A majority
they just have
of
a
them
title.
don't read it.
Exactly. It's copy paste. And they just put their name on it. They know they're going to have money to last the next election cycle. And that's what it's about. It's not about representing the people. So we have to get money completely out of politics if we're truly going to be a representative democracy, which we are not at this point.
And,
While we're talking
while we're
about
talking
it,
about it, I'm going to ask both of you.
You're
You're running
grassroots
grassroots campaigns.
Um,
I know
with
both our
campaigns, the
campaigns,
average
contribution
is
is pretty low. It's
$20, something like that, isn't it?
right.
Yeah.
Anthony, if folks want to help and donate to your
Mhm.
grassroots campaign, how do they do that?
Definitely. You know, I mean, if we're talking financial donations, you know, again, we're all in this struggle together. We let people know on a daily basis. We don't take any donation for granted, from $1 to $100 if possible. It means so much to us. You could go to voteanthonyclark.com to our contribution section and contribute. And again, it truly, truly helps us. We actually, you know, at our level, we just made history. We got the Sun-Times endorsement. The Sun-Times never has endorsed a congressional candidate of our stature, essentially Democratic Socialist, 100% progressive, 100% grassroots, against an entrenched incumbent. But it matters. It makes a difference. And if you can't contribute monetarily, contribute with your energy, whether it be canvassing, whether it be phone time, phone banking that you could do out the comfort of your home via the internet. There's so many different ways to get involved, but it all makes a difference because we have to somehow combat the millions of dollars that oftentimes incumbents have. And why? Because they have millions of dollars, what benefits candidates like Liam and I, they're not invested in making those personal connections. They're not invested in going door to door because they honestly care less at this point. It's a well-oiled machine. You know, oh, time to get elected again. Let's put some yard signs out. Let's put a few commercials out. You know, let's cut a check here or there to some, you know, influencers and call it a day. Meanwhile, we're busting our butts, boots to the ground on a daily basis. So nothing can replace that. That's invaluable, but we truly appreciate any contribution that can come.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So
Liam, I'd like you to tell where folks can help your campaign. And then, like either of you to jump in about the drug war and marijuana legalization, what's happening in both your states? What do you think more should be happening at the local level? And what more could and should be happening when you're a member of Congress at the federal level?
okay, so I'll give the financial stuff a quick comment on corporations, and we'll go back and forth on the drug war issue. For donation, again, entirely grassroots campaign. Our average donation is about $20, and I get tons of $1 contributions. Or as a joke that fits into the drug legalization one, I've got a number of $4.20 donations, which I always think is hilarious. But people give like whatever they can give, and that's fine. People can text bank from their homes. They can call from their homes. They can help me knock doors. I'm out knocking doors all the time and engaging with people. So there's tons of ways you can contribute to help out here, and ultimately that kind of people power really can win elections. For donations, my website is liamomara.org, liamomara.org. There's a little donate link at the top if you want to go straight to donate. It's bit.ly/Liam donate. Nice, easy way to get to that. And speaking on corporations, when corporations were created, there was a compromise made that gave them certain privileges and immunities that protected investors, which can actually improve investment rates. Somebody doesn't risk everything and lose everything that they own if you have this little layer in between you. But they were all, in exchange for those privileges, they had to serve the public interest. And corporate charters used to be written such that you have to serve the public interest of the area you're in exchange for that. And we've completely lost sight of that. A joke that often occurs to me when you mentioned Citizens United and corporations are not people. I'll believe corporations are people when the government executes one.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped doing that. We don't police corporations anymore. And anybody who tries to bring up the possibility of going after corporations, they just say, oh, well, we'll just open up a post office box in Bermuda and stop being a corporation here entirely. And we can no longer pursue that. We have to get back to actually policing this stuff in the public interest, because that's their whole reason for existing in the first place. There should be no reason to give any entity of that much wealth those kind of immunities if they don't give something back to us. So, you want to take the drug war issue first?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you again for your articulation. So essentially, the state of Illinois, we actually legalized as of January 1st. So, there was celebrations, across the state, particularly within the city. But what's extremely interesting as a campaign that even in 2017, we were running on the legalization of cannabis at a federal level with a focus on racial justice. And I love the sign, Liam. Love it. You better rep. You better represent, buddy.
Dan's helping out here. Look at that.
I got a dream catcher in the background, but just imagine,
You got. I saw your campaign shirt though. That's a campaign shirt.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, look at that. There you go.
Shirt on. But to make the connection, not to get too deep within the weeds, but I think, and I hope the majority of the individuals that are listening or will watch by now, if you're part of the movement, you understand that by design, our government has played a role in the disproportionate oppression of Black, brown, and impoverished individuals throughout our history. Slavery ended June 19th, 1865, but yet we still have slavery by another name. When you talk about sharecropping, we talked earlier about the military-industrial complex, where we have the prison-industrial complex. And let's be honest, in my estimation, Black bodies, particularly, after slavery, never ended being commodities. I will say that one more time. Black bodies never ended being commodities. While one form of oppression has ended, it essentially shifts. So instead of slavery on plantations, we now have slavery within our prisons. Brown bodies are commodities. Impoverished bodies, no matter who you are, if you're poor, you are a commodity. Poverty pays for everyone but the poor. It is profitable. So essentially, when you have the racist war on drugs that has existed for decades and decades, that has been supported by some of our presidential candidates and championed by them, when you have the disproportionate sentencing guidelines for, crack in comparison to cocaine, this all plays a role. And then when you look at cannabis, which is a plant, it's a medicine. It is a medicinal use medicine. I have my medical card. I've had it for years. So essentially, a plant that should have never been illegal in the first place, based upon prohibition, has led to extreme levels of profit for local and federal governments through the incarceration of particularly impoverished individuals who are disproportionately Black and brown. So the legalization of cannabis is a social justice issue. It's a racial justice issue. It's a civil rights issue. We must legalize at a federal level. And what we're witnessing now since January 1st at the state level is the fact that, isn't it interesting how the same individuals and corporations that benefited and profited when cannabis was prohibited are now still benefiting when it's legal, because we understand capitalism. Those with the means, those with the know-how, particularly with the money, they're going to dominate the industry. And that is what they're doing. So we're continuing to fight boots to the ground to ensure that the communities that have been most greatly targeted, most greatly impacted by prohibition will now benefit from legalization. So we have to start looking through a reparation style lens, a restorative lens. There's so many issues within the policy. 8% of funds now at the state level, they're being allotted to local police departments to essentially target street level dealers. They're trying to shut down the street market. And as we know, disproportionately, who are street level dealers? Minorities, poor individuals, essentially just trying to take care of their families. We need to expand our medicinal usage, our medical industry, and also something else to think about. And, then I'll shut up. But this is such a passionate issue for me. Each day, we're almost waking up to individuals that are targeting local dispensaries that are open now and essentially robbing local dispensaries. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so if you're not aware of this, so many people are like, well, why do they have hundreds of thousands of dollars on site? Because cannabis is not legalized at the federal level, banks are still discriminatory. We still have issues with our federal banking. So our dispensaries cannot work with federal banks in order to take their money and place them into banks like normal businesses to protect and build interest and so on and so forth. So they have to house often hundreds of thousands of dollars in unconventional ways that creates targeting. And lastly, I will also say at a federal level, we have to end employment discrimination for individuals that are utilizing cannabis. No one should lose their job or not be able to obtain a job due to cannabis, particularly, and tying it back, our military veterans who are dealing oftentimes with physical and mental disabilities and ailments that cannabis as a medicine helps, but yet it impacts their ability to obtain housing and employment. So it's a huge interconnected issue that exists. Okay, done.
All right. So my grandfather actually, a veteran himself, Marine, he was disabled with massive back problems. They had to do so many surgeries on it, try and fix it, that they were having to do surgeries just to remove scar tissue from previous surgeries. And they kept giving him essentially narcotic painkillers because the pain would build across the course of the day. And by the time he got into the evening, he could barely even stand. And they tried for a while. We actually grew some pot in the backyard, and it found that it was actually very helpful. It really did cut the pain, and because it's not addictive, it doesn't have the same kind of physical toll that the opiates have on it. That could have really helped him. They stopped. Everyone was afraid that they'd get caught because it's illegal, both at the time at the state level and federally. It just wasn't worth it. So it pushed him back onto narcotic painkillers, which do a lot more damage to you. I mean, no one dies from pot, but it does actually help with pain. So the fact that we have this plant illegal is just insane. I mean, it was a great gift to the lumber industry because you can get 4 times the amount of paper from hemp that you can from trees. So they made it all illegal, not just the stuff with THC, but all forms of hemp are illegal, which is just insane. You mentioned slavery earlier. In slavery ending, it really didn't. The 13th says, except as a punishment for a crime, which allows prisons to exploit labor, and it actually creates an upward pressure on the justice system to put more people in, and that again gets to the corrupt relations between business interests and government interests. We imprison more people than any country in the world, both in absolute terms and per capita. Communist China has 4 times our population and is literally a dictatorship, and we have more people in prison than they do. That makes no sense unless, then you remember people actually make money off it. Private prisons profit from it. All of the industries that supply the prisons profit from it. The prison labor can be easily sold to people on the outside, and the people doing the prison labor, they get almost nothing for it. We had massive wildfires in California. We had prisoners out there helping to fight the wildfires, and we were paying them almost nothing. They're like, here's $10 a day to go out and fight wildfires. I'm like, really? But it's $10. It just goes into their savings, and they don't have any payments to right now. I'm like, really? No, come on. This is it's pure exploitation. It's another form of slavery. And the race issue too with the drug war. I had a lot of friends and people around me growing up that were impacted by the drug war growing up, and I saw the disparities in sentencing, between white friends and black and brown friends when caught for things like this. It is a serious issue. We created this in the first place. I mean, the actual architects of Nixon's war on drugs have admitted that it was done specifically to target minorities, that it was done to further oppress minorities, to reinforce white domination of our politics and push people out. It was an attempt to push back against black empowerment. And it has persisted with a racial bias ever since. Reagan perpetuated that in his own campaign rhetoric. And ever since then, we have continued with the same basic problems. Look at, and this is not just an issue of Republicans. I mentioned, so Nixon and Reagan, I don't know. What about the crime bill in the 90s that we pushed through there? That also had a significantly negative impact on black and brown communities. And a lot of this time, we still have people running for president now that are like, cannabis is a gateway drug. I'm like, really? Are you kidding me?
Yes. And using prison labor to make calls.
Yeah, that too, yeah. I thought about bringing that one up, but I thought that might be a little more obvious who I was talking about.
Right.
But we do have people continuing to exploit these systems of white supremacy and oppression. And And on our side of this, on the Democratic side, we should not tolerate this anymore. We should be able to push back against this and say, look, it's time to change direction on this.
No question. I agree with everything that you stated. We could honestly talk about this issue for days and days and days, like many of the interconnected issues. And for me, just to sum it up again, I'm sure, our time is getting away. We have more questions. Again, in making I statements, as you stated, this is about power, and this is about who controls the power. This is about maintaining white supremacy. For me as a teacher, doing studies, I teach history. Even if we look at the historical history of policing, the institution was formed to essentially protect white supremacy, to protect property. And yet still we're here today. What has necessarily changed? As you mentioned in regards to slavery not ending at all and being slavery by a new name. And this is about voting. This is about the power of the vote. We're seeing across the nation right now to where even though a poll tax doesn't necessarily exist anymore, literacy tests don't necessarily exist anymore, voter disenfranchisement is alive and well, and particularly targets individuals of color and impoverished individuals. And when we look at our prison system, what is the main issue? Should incarcerated individuals be allowed to vote? Should felons be allowed to vote? This all ties into and comes back to the political power that individuals wield and have. And if they can tie you into our criminal justice system and utilize policies to say that because you've entered into our criminal justice system for X, Y, and Z reason, you no longer have the right or the privilege or the power to influence our democracy. And that's a huge issue that we have to pay attention to and recognize as interconnected.
Poll taxes do actually still exist in a way.
Yes.
Around the whole voter ID.
Exactly.
Because
it's
a lot
not
of
poll
people
tax by name, but yeah.
they have a hard time getting to the offices to do it. They shrink down the number of hours that they're going to be open for them. They space them out. They close out tons of offices, and then they roll out a voter ID law. So it stops a lot of poor people from voting.
Yep, no question.
The issues do ultimately come down to poverty. This is essentially a kind of class war that's been waged against the poor, and the rich have been winning. The policing have always been tied into these same networks of power, and a lot of them did actually have a direct connection to the maintenance of white supremacy. Right? This is not just an issue of the civil rights era. We've all seen the photos of policemen with fire hoses and whatnot against protesters in the 50s and 60s. A lot of this never really ended. We still have disproportionate policing in poor communities, and a disconnect between the fact that the higher crime rates come from the poverty, not the origin of the people. But we put more police there, so there's a greater sense of fear. With more police on the ground, they tend to be used more or get involved. Not all cops are bad people. People get into it they want to do good. They want to help out. But the system, and because they're in a position of power that's essentially unaccountable, it can draw the worst out of some of them. And we see that over and over again, those abuses. And all we do to solve that is to keep throwing more military equipment at them. Militarizing the police has not been helpful to us at all. And
not at all.
If it was, why do we have the highest crime rates in the developed world?
Right. Yeah.
Our high prison population and our militarized police do not lower crime; they increase the amount of crime.
Right. I'm sorry.
If we may, I'd like to switch over to education. Okay.
Yeah,
That's a good overlap.
Okay, because you're both teachers. I know, Liam, you were recently endorsed by the California Teachers Association. Anthony, I imagine you have significant support from teachers as well. So talk about, if you would, there's a thing people talk about called the school to prison pipeline. What does that mean? What happens? What can we do about it? What can you as candidates and members of Congress do about that?
Yeah, definitely. So again, I've been teaching for 15 years. 15 years. I've been teaching for 11 years. My first 2 years, I taught at an alternative school in the Austin community within our district. Predominantly Black community, impoverished due to just the lack of investment through, again, by design government. From there, I went to a charter school for 1 year. Glad I was able to get that experience because I understand the importance of unionization and unions. From there, I went to a city school for 1 year, and now I'm back at a public school for the past 7. But it's been interesting dynamic for me to experience to go from the alternative school again to where I mentioned earlier to where property taxes are funding our schools across the nation. But I literally had freshmen through senior students in the same classroom. We had 3 computers. Uh, I can only make about maybe 3 or 4 or 5 copies per day. Like that's all total copies. Have to supply our own supplies. I was making probably $20,000 per year. It was a housing center, essentially. Again, we go back to the commodification of individuals and human beings. It was a housing center. We were not preparing our students to be global citizens. We were not preparing students for post-secondary success. We were essentially housing and exposing them to essentially the prison system, the prison industrial complex, how you don't have nurses or social workers within a school building, but you have police officers, you have security officers within a building. So they're indoctrinated in a sense with following rules and guidelines and being placed in a cell essentially because we had classrooms with no windows, so on and so forth. So understand, at a micro level, that is a microcosm of the issue that exists across our country to where schools are underfunded, public schools are closing across this nation. The property tax model is inequitable. Title I and Title II funding often do not go to the schools that are most in need, how they are calculated. So it's a huge issue that exists. And what happens is you have schools within communities to where students are essentially just exist. They are there. They are not learning anything. The only exposure they have, again, are to resource officers, are to security officers, are to how to listen to instruction. And again, how does this play into once you are incarcerated? What do you have to do? You have to listen to instruction. You're moving from one location to the next. You have to follow the laws. You have to follow the rules and guidelines. And if you don't, there are consequences. So we have schools where Black and brown students are disproportionately represented within our detention systems, within our in-school suspension systems, within our out-of-school suspension systems. They are not getting educations. And, and here, even at the higher level, even for the students that are receiving education, we're not preparing them for success either. We are behind so many industrialized nations in regards to how we are not preparing our students for success. So it's a huge issue across the board, but the school to prison pipeline is real. It exists, and it's a feeder system. And it starts as early as preschool. I'm serious. To where predominantly you have white teachers, and nothing's wrong with white teachers. I'm not saying that at all. I celebrate and love all teachers. But the issue is you often have white teachers that are not from the community, that come into community. They're teaching in schools. And similar to what Liam said with police officers, they may be well-meaning. These teachers may not be racist or so on and so forth. But when you work within a racist system, you're perpetuating that system and may not even recognize and understand that. So classroom management is an extremely important tool. And if you don't have it, if your classroom management sucks, you're feeding students directly into the school to prison pipeline and helping that feeder system from an early age.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you mentioned the endorsement, so I'm supposed to plug that sort of thing. So
Plug it.
So thank you very much to the California Teachers Association, right? As well as my first union endorsement was actually the California Faculty Association on one of my campuses. So I'm happy for that. I'm a member of 2 unions right now as a professor. The key issue that stands out for me here really is it's generational poverty and how we reinforce it. You mentioned the property tax issue. It's a huge one. When you have massive disparities in the income in particular areas, and that's the main way the schools are funded, not on a state or federal level, then you're going to have substandard schools in certain areas. And that's going to reinforce this. This is going to reinforce not only racial issues or for Black and brown bodies there because of the areas that people are concentrated in, but also just poverty in general. In whatever the poor areas are always going to be neglected there. And we ended up, instead of making things like that better, for a while we made them a lot worse with the standardized testing, because then if students don't do well in a particular standardized test, the schools end up losing some of their funding. So they're then motivated to teach only to a test, which is not actually giving them the skills that they need to succeed or to thrive in society. Because those standardized tests do not prepare you for college. They're not designed to. I mean, I get a lot of students that they've never done any work that would prepare them for the kind of critical reason that's necessary in college, because they only had to memorize something and spit it back out. And they're expecting a test like that. This does not help people at all. So it just reinforces, again, a generational poverty issue. And this, again, is where we're basically failing the country as a whole. I love the dog.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sonny's in the picture now.
And there's tons of places where you can recognize a problem and then do something about it. And I don't understand why this is so difficult in this country, except for the corrupting influence of money in our politics, because it keeps the same kind of people coming in who are willing to toe the particular corporate lines and support the existing networks of profit that are there. There was an interesting study done a number of years ago. The Finns recognized that their students were not doing terribly well in international standards. They said, okay, we got to fix something. So they just scrapped it all, went back to the drawing board, figured out new ways to approach education, implemented that, and skyrocketed in terms of their results. We are steadily declining in our results. And it's not just for like the STEM areas that get a lot of attention, that we need to improve our science education, which is admittedly bad, but it's all the humanities that are suffering as well. And people often forget that the purpose of things like history and English and philosophy and all that is to make you a well-rounded person, to make you a good critical thinker. Education should be producing people who can be the leaders of tomorrow, and instead it's failing them. And the less prepared people are, the more likely they are to fall into, harmful patterns that send them off into prison. I don't understand why we should be setting about an entire system to prepare people just for a life of poverty or imprisonment. It makes no sense at all to me.
No question.
I mean, and again, this is not an issue with like the teachers. I know a lot of teachers and people that we really want to do well. It's the system that's the problem. It's the lack of resources for it. It's the basic structure of it. And that's what we need to get people in to office who can revise these.
Yeah, and shout out to some policies. I know, again, all teachers. I truly believe teachers need to be paid more. I think we all do. That's a huge issue that exists. We have so many teachers that have to work multiple jobs. They can't live within, the districts that they're teaching in because of lack of affordability. So that's a huge issue that needs to be addressed. The interconnected issues that exist even with our students, from homelessness to food insecurity. All these issues play a role. So just want to, again, shout out to teachers, shout out to our students. Again, the majority of us are on the grind and, like Liam stated, want to do better. But the systemic issues do indeed exist, and we have to recognize it and speak truth to power and call it out.
Okay, so a policy issue. I'm a big proponent of improving our school lunch system, particularly
no question.
Poor areas. Over and over and over again, you see studies showing that proper nutrition actually helps people to learn. Go figure. I mean, if the brain is well nourished, but we don't actually care. I mean, we have poor food choices in a lot of places. You have students that literally cannot afford food. And a lot of states don't do it. I mean, some states will subsidize some of that stuff. California throws some stuff in, a lot of states don't. So you have a lot of kids going to school who don't have a lunch. And oftentimes that's the only good meal they have a shot at during the day because they're poor at home too. Lunch debt should not exist.
No, lunch shaming, lunch debt should not exist. Not at all. You're correct, 100%. Again, I'm huge on the Black Panther Party. We know, the breakfast program that they launched. We definitely need. I truly believe in, universal breakfast and lunch programs nationally. It's a huge issue that exists. Universal pre-K. There's so many different policies and legislation that we could be pushing forward that help working class poor across this country better obtain, proper nutrition proper education, because how can we expect as teachers? I think it's ridiculous at the end of the day for us to expect someone to, do statistics or, complete some math problems, recite Shakespeare when they're
Right.
hungry,
Right.
recite Shakespeare. How can you, assign homework when individuals don't have homes?
Right.
So it's a huge issue that exists that must be addressed, no question.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. And let's remind folks, if we could once again, if they want to volunteer, donate, contribute, get involved with your campaigns, where should they go to?
Yeah, definitely. Again, for myself, this has been wonderful. I'm glad I'm on this live. Our website is voteanthonyclark.com. That's Clark without an E. So that's voteanthonyclark.com. Our social media, whether it be Instagram, Twitter, Anthony V. Clark 20. We need all hands on deck. Our vote takes place March 17th. We've really been pushing forward, obtaining great endorsements, but nothing is more important than the coalitions we build. So definitely support us. And I've enjoyed being on this live broadcast.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure speaking with Anthony, and our struggles are universal. These are issues that run all across the country. Poor people everywhere have a lot of the same challenges, and we have to do better for people. So the way to do that is to send in candidates who are taking clean money or not tied into these earlier systems here. So every bit of support we get is really appreciated there. For me, again, liamomara.org, liamomara.org, because someone has been sitting on the .com forever and I can't get it. And then there's the bit.ly/Liam Donate. There's a volunteer tab also on the website if you want to help out with things like phone banking, text banking, anything like that. Definitely jump in there. So yeah.
Okay. And Liam, your the election day is March 3rd, about 9 days.
Yeah, we're almost there.
Anthony, and ballots already available, been distributed in California. Anthony, your election day is March 17th.
Yes, March 17th, early voting is starting. Again, as Liam stated, it was a pleasure meeting both of you in person when we came to California. This is what it's about. The issues that we face are interconnected. They require interconnected solutions that are attacking the root cause. Struggle is a universal language. And I think we have two candidates here, in regard to the movement overall. We play a role in this movement. This movement is bigger than one candidate, than one race. But we're speaking struggle fluently. Because one thing I like to tell individuals is we can't other people. It is not an immigrant's fault. It is not a woman's fault. It is not a person of color's fault that we find ourselves as working class poor in the place that we find ourselves in. Let's correctly identify it's by design. It's capitalistic society that this government maintains with white supremacy to maintain oppression. And we're truly fighting that. So I thank you, Liam. I've made a new friend at the end of the day, made a new comrade. And I truly appreciate and wish you well March 3rd. But understand, even after March 3rd and March 17th, Liam and I and our movement and our teams and the role we play in this overall greater movement, we're going to continue to fight.
And we have to continue to fight. A lot of the changes that we're talking about, none of this comes down to one election, electing one president, electing one Congress. These things, we have a lot of work to do. And we have to stay in this and we have to stay engaged. Because
no question.
We're dealing with a ton of things that are really, they are long-term problems, whether you're talking about something over a few decades or if you bring in the question of white supremacy, issues that go back many centuries. And a lot of the issues do come back to poverty for me. They really do come back to a kind of classist structure that initially attempted to divide poor white and poor black workers from each other in order to, better control both populations. This has been built into our society from the beginning, and we have to be able to push back against it. And the first step there is really to get in a clean Congress, getting people that are not tied into that system.
Okay. I want to thank the both of you. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank the folks that are watching this later. We'll be posting this video to Facebook, to YouTube,
I think it cut out.
and to our websites. Yeah, Anthony. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we dropped Anthony.
Okay, And we may try and do this again a couple weeks after the primary in California, before the primary in Illinois. We'll let you know if we're able to pull that off. Okay.
Okay. This is
Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Thanks for watching.